In 2023, the Reynolds family of four, a husband, wife, and their two young kids, packed their SUV and headed out for a summer road trip across the southwestern United States. They never made it back. Number 911 calls. No signs of car trouble, no financial activity, just vanished. The desert gave no answers and their case went cold until a dusty Nikon camera was dug up by a hiker near the Arizona-Nevada border 2 years later. What was on the memory card would make seasoned detectives fall silent. What started as a happy road trip became something much darker, and the story behind it had never been told till now. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The sun was just starting to rise when Mark Reynolds locked the front door of his Colorado home for the last time. His wife, Alyssa, buckled their 6-year-old daughter, Clara, into the back seat beside her 10-year-old brother, Jamie. Their silver 2019 Toyota Highlander was spotless, packed with snacks, spare clothes, a couple of walkie-talkies, and a Nikon DSLR camera, Mark's idea to document every moment like a memory time capsule. They were headed southwest, planning to visit national parks, quirky roadside diners, and the Grand Canyon before swinging through Vegas for a single night. From there, the plan was to loop back through Utah and head home. Mark, a financial analyst who loved maps, had the whole thing carefully planned and pinned on his GPS. The family's first few days went great. Mark took pictures of the kids holding up giant hamburgers outside Jumbo Joe's Diner in New Mexico. Alyssa posted selfies with desert backdrops on her Instagram, but by day 4 the posts stopped. At first, no one noticed. Mark's boss thought he was just off-grid. Alyssa's sister assumed they were too busy having fun. It wasn't until day 10 when Mark missed a mandatory virtual meeting that red flags began waving. Phone calls went straight to voicemail. Messages were left unread. By day 12, the Reynolds family was officially declared missing. State troopers in New Mexico and Arizona launched a multi-state alert. Helicopters flew over canyons. Officers checked gas station cameras. Still, there was nothing. Their last known location, confirmed by a blurry dash cam at a highway gas stop, was a dusty fuel station on Route 93, about 120 miles north of Phoenix. Then the SUV disappeared from every radar. 2 years later, in a remote stretch of the Mojave Desert, a solo hiker named Eric Wallace stumbled upon something strange. He was several miles off any marked trail, using his metal detector to comb for junk or valuables when the machine screamed. After about 20 minutes of digging through sun-baked dirt, he uncovered a small, beat-up backpack. Inside it was a Nikon camera, almost perfectly preserved in a plastic Ziploc bag. There was no ID, no wallet, no phone. Just the camera and 3 protein bar wrappers. Eric turned the camera over to local authorities. The model matched the one listed in the Reynolds missing persons report. When investigators recovered the data from the memory card, what they saw made one of them, a 20-year veteran, walk out of the room and throw up in the hallway. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to day 5 of the trip. The Reynolds family had just crossed into Arizona. The roads were long and lonely, carved through dry landscapes and rocky cliffs. Their next stop was a secluded Airbnb outside the town of Dolan Springs, a place with desert views and total privacy. As they drove, Clara sang quietly in the back seat while Jamie played a racing game on his tablet. Alyssa was dozing off with her feet on the dash. Mark was behind the wheel, focused, always slightly nervous on unfamiliar roads. Up ahead, he noticed a dark SUV pulled off the side of the road. The hood was up, and 2 men were waving for help. One of them pointed urgently at the engine. Mark slowed down. "I think we should stop," he said. Alyssa sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Are you sure? This road's dead quiet." "Exactly. If it was us, we'd hope someone would stop." He pulled over. Mark got out while Alyssa stayed inside with the kids. He approached the men cautiously. Both were dressed in dusty clothes, one with a baseball cap, the other with tattoos crawling up his arms. They looked like travelers. One was crouched near the open hood, pretending to inspect something. "Car trouble?" Mark asked. The tattooed guy nodded. "Yeah, overheating, man. You got water?" Mark turned back to his SUV, opening the trunk to grab a jug. As he reached in, he heard a click unmistakable. A handgun being cocked, he spun around. The tattooed man had a pistol raised at his chest. The guy with the baseball cap pulled a second one, aiming it at the passenger seat. Alyssa screamed. Mark's heart hammered. "Please, I've got kids in there." "Exactly," the man said coldly. "Get in the back seat, all of you, now." Within seconds, the Reynolds family was hijacked. The two men forced Mark into the third row, sandwiched between his kids, while Alyssa sat in the front with a gun to her ribs. The tattooed man drove, fast, cutting through side roads off the main highway. They didn't talk much, but from the way they checked behind constantly and avoided police-prone areas, Mark could tell these weren't just two guys with a bad plan. They'd done this before. Clara sobbed quietly. Jamie held his father's hand, squeezing so tight his knuckles turned white. About an hour later, they turned off onto a dirt path with no signs. It led into a canyon, dry and crumbling on both sides. The SUV bumped over rocks and dips until they reached a shallow cave tucked into a hill. There were tire tracks already there. This wasn't random. One of the men stepped out and yanked the back door open. "Everyone out." Mark tried to reason with them. "We don't have money. We're not important people. Just let my kids go." The man hit him in the ribs with the gun butt. Out. Inside the cave, they were forced to sit. Alyssa wrapped her arms around the children. One of the men took their phones and smashed them. The other found the Nikon camera and examined it. He scoffed. "Amateurs, you're going to wish we didn't find this." They kept the family in the cave that night. It was freezing and no one slept. Every sound outside, a wind gust, shifting gravel, felt like the start of something worse. And it was. But that would come the next morning. The next morning, the desert was already heating up. Mark's back ached from the cold, hard ground. He shifted carefully, trying not to wake Clara, who had finally cried herself to sleep beside him. Jamie sat with wide, sleepless eyes, still clutching a corner of his dad's shirt like a lifeline. Alyssa was awake, too. Her eyes were swollen, her lips dry and cracked, but she hadn't cried. Not since last night. She just stared at the cave opening where the two men, they never gave names, had disappeared before sunrise. A single gunshot cracked in the distance. Birds scattered. Mark flinched. "That wasn't far," Alyssa whispered. "They're doing something out there. Planning something." An hour passed. Maybe two. The sun crept higher, casting long shadows into the cave. They hadn't been given food or water. Jamie was sweating, his shirt soaked at the back. Clara stirred restlessly. Then the one with the baseball cap returned, this time alone. He held a half-empty bottle of water and tossed it toward them without a word. It landed in the dirt near Mark's feet. He looked at the bottle, then back at the man. "Why are you doing this?" The man didn't answer. He just walked out again, leaving the family alone once more. Mark waited a minute, then leaned toward Alyssa. "We need to do something. Tonight, when it gets dark." She looked at him. "With what? They have guns, Mark." "We have nothing." "We have each other," he said quietly. "We can wait till they're asleep, then run. What if they catch us?" Mark looked at his kids. "Then we try again, because we don't just sit here waiting to die." That evening, both men came back. This time they brought something with them, plastic zip ties. One by one, they tied the family's wrists behind their backs. Jamie started crying when they grabbed him, and Mark lunged forward. "Don't touch him." The tattooed man pistol whipped Mark across the face, sending him crashing to the dirt. "Next time you move, I'll shoot you in the stomach and let you bleed out in front of them," he snarled. Mark spit blood but said nothing more. They were left tied up, lying shoulder to shoulder in the cave, while one man sat outside on a lawn chair with a rifle across his lap, keeping watch. The other lay against the SUV, feet up on the bumper, chewing sunflower seeds. When night fell, the cold crept in again. Mark waited and waited. He tested the zip ties slowly, carefully. Back in college, he'd seen a video, some self-defense workshop, about how to snap out of one. It required tension, pressure, timing. Now was the time. He started rocking his arms forward and back, over and over. Alyssa noticed and turned her head slightly. "What are you?" "Trying something," he whispered. He rocked faster, harder. Clara was sniffling beside him. Jamie was shaking again. Then snap, his wrists came free. Mark paused, catching his breath. Then he leaned over and started biting Alyssa's zip tie. It took nearly 3 minutes, and the plastic tore his gums open, but it worked. Soon, both were free. They didn't speak, just nodded. The kids were next. They cut the ties with a sharp rock Mark had spotted earlier near the cave entrance. It was time. They crept toward the cave opening. The rifleman outside had fallen asleep. His head drooped and the gun lay across his lap. Alyssa tiptoed behind Mark, carrying Clara in her arms, while Jamie held tight to her waistband. They moved low, behind a cluster of shrubs. The SUV was parked 10 feet away. The tattooed man was inside it now, possibly asleep too. Mark turned back, whispered, "We make a run for it." They moved 10 steps, 20. The ground crunched under Jamie's foot, a brittle cactus branch. Snap. The man in the lawn chair sat up instantly, blinking. He saw the movement, reached for his gun. "Hey," Mark shouted. "Go!" Alyssa took off running with the kids. Mark charged toward the man in the chair, slamming into him just as the rifle was raised. They crashed to the ground in a swirl of dust and fists. Mark punched blindly, caught the man in the jaw, then felt a brutal strike to his ribs. The tattooed man flew out of the SUV, gun drawn. He aimed wildly toward the fleeing figures. Mark roared, "No!" He grabbed the rifle, yanked it up, and a shot rang out skyward. Then another. The tattooed man fired. A bullet grazed Alyssa's shoulder. She screamed, but didn't stop running. Jamie cried out, "Mom!" They reached a dry gully and dropped behind a boulder. Alyssa was bleeding, but she was alive. She pressed her hand to the wound and pushed the kids behind her. Back at the SUV, Mark was struggling with the man in the chair. The rifle had been kicked away. They rolled in the dirt, fists flying. Then the tattooed man stomped over and cracked his pistol across Mark's skull. Everything went black. Mark woke to water being splashed on his face. His hands were tied again. His head throbbed. He was back inside the cave. But this time he was alone. "No, Ali, no, Clary." The tattooed man crouched next to him, breathing hard. "You've got balls, I'll give you that." "Where are they?" Mark's voice was cracked and dry. "Gone," the man said with a smile. "If they're smart, they'll keep running. But you're going to help us now." Mark shook his head. "No, not a chance." The man stood. "You will, or I'll find them one by one." Then he walked out of the cave. Mark laid there, mind racing, blood trickling from the side of his head. He had no idea where his family was, if they'd been caught, if they were even still alive. But he wasn't giving up, not yet. Alyssa's legs were giving out, but she didn't stop running. Her arm burned where the bullet had grazed her shoulder, and the blood had soaked the side of her shirt. But Clara was clinging to her back, and Jamie's little hand was in hers, and that was all that mattered. The desert stretched ahead, empty and hot, lit only by the stars and a thin slice of moon. Alyssa had no idea where they were, no cell service, no lights, not even a road in sight. All she knew was that they had to keep moving. Behind them, back near the cave, she thought she heard yelling. Maybe gunfire. She didn't look back. "We're going to find help," she said, breathless. "Just keep going." Clara was too tired to answer. Jamie's shoes were nearly falling apart, and he limped with every step, but he never once let go of her hand. They ran for what felt like forever, until they reached a small hill dotted with sharp rocks and desert brush. Alyssa slowed down and ducked behind a large boulder, her chest heaving. She sat down, gently placing Clara beside her and pulling Jamie close. "We'll rest here, just for a minute," she whispered. Her whole body was shaking. She peeled back her shirt and looked at the wound, not deep, but raw. She tore a strip from the bottom of her tank top and tied it around her shoulder as tightly as she could. Clara was drifting off again, exhausted. Jamie stared into the night. "Are they going to find us?" "No," Alyssa said, "not if we stay smart." But even as she said it, her mind was spinning. How far could they really get? No food, no water, no idea where they were. She forced herself to think clearly. The sun would rise soon. Once it did, the heat would be unbearable. They needed to find shelter, shade, maybe a road, anything. "We'll wait here until the sky turns orange," she said softly. "Then we move." Back at the cave, Mark's wrists were now bound with heavy duct tape. His head throbbed with every heartbeat, and dried blood crusted the side of his face. He sat in the dirt, leaning against the rock wall, staring at the man with the baseball cap. The guy had taken the rifle apart and was cleaning it slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "You picked the wrong family, man," Mark muttered. The man smirked. "You think this is the first time we've done this?" Mark's jaw clenched. "So what's the plan? Ransom? You already smashed our phones. You think someone's gonna wire money to you through cactus mail?" "No ransom," the man said. "No paper trail. No witnesses." Mark's stomach twisted. Then footsteps echoed from outside. The tattooed man returned, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face. "They're gone. Took off west. I lost them in the ridge." The man with the cap cursed under his breath. "Sun's coming up. They won't last a day in that heat. Unless someone finds them." They exchanged looks. Then the tattooed man turned to Mark. "You want your wife and kids to survive?" Mark didn't speak. "You're going to help us track them. They'll trust you. Come out when you call. It'll be easy." Mark spat on the ground. "Go to hell." The tattooed man raised his boot and kicked Mark in the ribs so hard he couldn't breathe. When Mark finally sucked in air again, the man leaned down, voice cold. "We'll start cutting off pieces of them when we catch them. Maybe we'll bring her back here, let you hear it." Mark looked up, eyes burning with rage. "You lay one hand on them and I swear." The man laughed and walked off. At sunrise, Alyssa woke the kids. The desert was turning gold, the light bouncing off the sand like fire. Her shirt was soaked in sweat, and the makeshift bandage had loosened. "Time to go," she said, lifting Clara again. They walked downhill, toward what looked like a dry wash. It might have once been a riverbed. If they were lucky, it would lead to a highway or even a ranger's post. After an hour of walking, Jamie pointed. "Look," a shape on the horizon, tall and rusty fence. They hurried toward it and found a stretch of barbed wire. Beyond it was a gravel road, barely more than a trail, but clearly used by vehicles. There were fresh tire marks in the dirt. Alyssa's eyes lit up. "We follow this?" They moved quickly, heads low, staying in the brush beside the road. But every step took more energy than the last. Clara was getting heavier. Jamie was falling behind. Then Alyssa saw it, an old wooden shack about a quarter-mile away, sitting crooked under a dead tree. It wasn't much, but it had a roof, maybe even water. "We're almost there," she said, trying to smile. At the shack, Alyssa pushed the door open with her good arm. The wood creaked. Inside, it was dark, dusty, and smelled like animal droppings. A broken chair lay in the corner, and a rusted metal drum sat in the middle of the floor. No water, no phone, but at least they had shade. She set Clara down gently and helped Jamie lie flat on the cooler floor. Then she stood in the doorway, looking back at the road. Then she saw them, two tiny dots in the distance. Growing bigger, Alyssa's heart dropped. The men! They had found them. She ran back inside, grabbed a broken broomstick, and snapped it in half. She wasn't leaving without a fight. Jamie looked up. "Mom, quiet," she whispered. She peeked through a crack in the wooden wall. The SUV stopped a few hundred feet away. Two figures stepped out. One was holding a rifle. They were coming. She pulled Jamie and Clara into the back corner of the shack and placed her body in front of them. If she could just slow them down. By time, maybe they could. A noise outside, footsteps. Then a sound behind the shack. Not the men. Something else. Another voice. "Hello, anybody inside?" A man's voice. Different, calm. Alyssa froze. Was it a trap? She stood up slowly and peeked out. A man in jeans and a tan ranger's shirt stood beside a tan off-road truck, one hand resting near his belt, which had a holstered pistol. He was looking at the shack with concern. "Ma'am," he called again. Alyssa stepped out slowly, hands raised. "We need help," she said. "Please." "They're coming." He looked past her toward the road. His eyes narrowed. He stepped forward, hand now gripping his gun. "Get in the truck." Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The ranger didn't wait for an explanation. As soon as he saw Alyssa's bloody shirt and terrified kids, he reached for the truck door and yelled, "Get in, quick." Alyssa didn't ask questions. She scooped Clara into her arms and pushed Jamie toward the truck. The ranger opened the passenger side door and helped them in fast, slamming it shut behind them. Then he ran around to the driver's side, jumped in, and fired up the engine. Alyssa looked back at the shack as the truck pulled away. Dust kicked up behind them, filling the air, but her eyes locked on two dark figures walking down the road. "They're the ones," she said, breath ragged. "They have my husband." The ranger nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll deal with them." The truck bounced over the uneven gravel road, speeding toward the main highway. "Name's Walker," he said. "I'm a ranger. Been out here all morning checking on water stations." "Thank God," Alyssa whispered. "You're lucky I was close. This area's dead most of the year." Clara whimpered beside her. Jamie reached across and took her hand. Alyssa could feel her hands trembling, the kind of fear that didn't fade even when help arrived. "Do you have a radio?" she asked. Walker nodded. "It's in the back, mounted. I'll call for help once we hit the ridge." No signal this low. Behind them, the two men suddenly picked up their pace. One raised a rifle. Walker saw it in the mirror. "Hold on." The truck swerved hard just as a shot cracked in the distance. The bullet pinged off the tailgate. Clara screamed. Jamie ducked. Walker floored the gas. The truck roared forward, kicking rocks behind it. Another shot missed again. "Damn lucky they can't aim," Walker muttered. They sped toward a ridge where a tall wooden sign read, "Desert Preserve ends, 1 mile ahead." "If we make it to that post, I'll get through on the radio," Walker said. "Help will come fast." Alyssa gripped the dashboard. Her heart was pounding. They were so close. Back at the cave, Mark was still tied up, struggling to stay conscious. His hands were duct-taped behind him, but he was grinding the edge against a jagged rock behind his back. Every movement hurt, but he could feel the layers weakening. He had to get out. He had no idea what had happened to Alyssa or the kids, and that terrified him more than the gun pressed to his head earlier. He heard a voice outside, the man with the cap. "They're on the move. Rangers with them." "Damn it," the tattooed man hissed. "You sure?" They got in his truck. Headed north. A pause. "We can still catch them." Mark closed his eyes. They were alive. Still running, still fighting. He pulled harder at the tape. Another layer snapped. Then he heard footsteps again, coming in fast. "Time to move," one of the men barked. Mark leaned to the side just as the tattooed man entered the cave. In one sudden motion, Mark pushed himself forward and slammed his shoulder into the man's knee, knocking him off balance. The pistol dropped to the ground. Mark lunged for it with his hands still tied. He kicked the gun away just as the second man burst in and tackled him to the ground. A fist connected with his jaw, then another, but Mark didn't stop struggling. The fight ended with the butt of a rifle smashing into his temple again, sending him into darkness. Walker's truck hit the ridge just as the radio began to crackle. He grabbed the mic and spoke fast. "This is Ranger Walker Urgent. I have a wounded woman and 2 minors under threat. Armed suspects in pursuit, 1 vehicle, black SUV, unknown plates. We're on North Dry Ridge Trail, 2 miles south of Route 15. Requesting backup immediately." Static, then a reply. "Copy that, Walker. Troopers en route from Junction. ETA 10 minutes. Stay put if safe." Alyssa breathed a sigh of relief, but she wasn't letting her guard down. Walker slowed the truck, keeping to the trail edge, then turned onto a narrow dirt path partially hidden by brush. "We'll wait here," he said. "Better they don't see us from the main road." The truck idled behind some shrubs. The sun was rising fast, turning the sand and rocks blinding white. Jamie sat silently now, clutching Clara against him. Walker looked at Alyssa. "We'll keep you safe. Promise." She nodded, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then the rumble of another engine. The black SUV. It crawled down the trail toward the ridge, scanning both sides. Walker reached under his seat and pulled out a small black case. Inside was a compact rifle. He loaded it fast, then peeked over the hood. "If they stop, I'll draw them away," he said. "You stay here, lock the doors. Don't move." "Don't leave us," Clara whispered. Alyssa leaned across the seat. "Just stay down, please. You don't need to be a hero." "I won't do anything stupid," Walker said. "Just stay behind the truck." The SUV stopped at the top of the ridge. One man stepped out, the tattooed one. He looked around, then pulled out binoculars. Walker ducked. "They're looking," he said. "Probably spotted the tire tracks." A moment passed. Then the SUV began to move again, turning slowly toward the path where they were hiding. "Damn it," Walker muttered. "They're coming this way." Alyssa turned. "Can we outrun them?" "Not with this truck in the brush. We'll be stuck. Best chance is I draw them out." He looked at the kids, then back at Alyssa. "Lock the doors. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." Before Alyssa could argue, he was out of the truck and running toward the other side of the trail, moving fast and low through the rocks. The SUV reached the bottom of the ridge and stopped. Then a gunshot, not aimed, just loud. A warning, Walker shouted from behind the rocks. "Hey, drop the guns, you're outnumbered. Officers are coming." More shouting. Then gunfire. It exploded in the air, loud and sharp. Alyssa ducked, pulling Clara and Jamie down onto the floor of the truck. More shots rang out, then silence. 10 long seconds passed. Then the radio crackled again. "Walker? We're close. What's your location?" Alyssa grabbed the mic. "We're with him on the east trail, behind a brush line." "They're shooting, please." Another voice broke in. "Units coming in hot, stay down." Outside, another shot, then tires screeching. A squad car tore around the ridge curve, sirens off but lights flashing. 2 officers jumped out, hands where we can see them. One of the men, the one with the baseball cap, dropped his rifle and raised his hands. The tattooed man ran, he didn't get far. Walker tackled him from behind, pinning him to the ground. Handcuffs snapped. It was over, for now. Alyssa climbed out of the truck, shaking, clutching Clara to her chest. One officer rushed up. "You okay, ma'am?" She nodded, barely able to speak. "My husband, they still have him." The officer looked at his partner. "We'll get him back." But deep in the desert, Mark Reynolds had just woken up again, tied, bruised, but alive. And someone else was watching. Mark's eyes fluttered open, his head throbbed. The inside of his mouth was dry, thick with the metallic taste of blood. He couldn't tell how much time had passed, hours maybe, days. He was lying on his side, his hands once again bound behind his back, this time not with duct tape, but with a pair of zip ties so tight they cut into his skin. The cave was quiet, no voices, no footsteps, just wind whistling faintly across the desert rock. He tried to sit up, but winced, pain shot through his ribs where the man had kicked him earlier. He looked around, still alone. He forced himself up onto one elbow, inch by inch, and scooted closer to the cave wall where the rock was jagged. He started working the plastic ties against it. The edge cut into his wrist, but not fast enough. Then, voices outside, he froze. "Did you wipe the dash cam?" one voice asked. "Smashed it too. You sure the ranger didn't record anything?" "I don't think so, but I'm not taking chances." Footsteps approached. Mark rolled quickly onto his back, pretending to be unconscious. The tattooed man stepped inside and crouched beside him. "You're tougher than you look," he muttered. "Most guys would be begging for mercy by now." Mark didn't move. The man shook his head and pulled out a small flask. "Wake up, I know you're faking." Mark opened his eyes slowly, groaning for effect. "What do you want?" he rasped. "Let's talk." Mark gave a bitter laugh. "Talk? About what? How you kidnapped my family." The man ignored him. "They got your wife and kids. But they didn't get you. That gives me leverage." Mark stared at him. "You helped me disappear. Help me move a few things through the border, stuff I had stashed before all this happened, and I'll let you go. You do that, maybe I tell you where your wife is." Mark's jaw clenched. "You expect me to trust you?" The man smiled. "No, I expect you want to live." Miles away, Alyssa sat in a white tent surrounded by medics and officers. Jamie and Clara were being treated for dehydration, while a nurse cleaned the wound on her shoulder. She barely noticed the sting of antiseptic. Her mind was somewhere else. She hadn't heard anything about Mark. The officers had caught one of the men, the one with the cap, and the ranger, Walker, had brought down the other. But Mark wasn't with them. She pulled aside a female officer. "Where's my husband? Where are they keeping him?" "We're working on it," the woman said calmly. "We have one suspect talking. The other's not saying a word." Alyssa's throat tightened. "He's still out there, isn't he?" The officer nodded. "But we're getting close." Alyssa clenched her fists. "Get him back, please." In the desert, Mark leaned against the cave wall, breathing hard. He'd agreed to the deal, not because he believed a word the man said, but because he needed a chance. "I help you," he said slowly. "But first I see my family. You show me they're alive." The man paced the cave, thinking. "You're not in a position to make demands. I don't help you unless I know they're safe." The man stopped pacing. "Fine, I'll make a call." He stepped outside. Mark listened closely, picking up muffled words. "She's with them. Ranger's got 'em." Yeah, locked down. No, I got the husband. He'll help us move the stash." Then silence. When the man came back, his face was tense. "Change of plans. They've moved your family to a secure site, probably a ranger station or highway post." Mark blinked. "So you lied." "I didn't know they'd move them so fast," he snapped. "Doesn't matter. You still want to see them again. You help me now." Mark stayed quiet. Every second talking bought him time. Back at the ranger station, Walker sat across from the man in the cap. His hands were cuffed, and an officer stood by the door. "Start talking," Walker said. The man stared at him. "You're looking at kidnapping, attempted murder, endangering minors, and crossing state lines. That's life, maybe worse. Tell us where your partner is. Tell us where Mark Reynolds is." The man cracked his neck. "No deal unless I get immunity." Walker slammed a folder down. "You don't get to negotiate. You talk, or we bury you in charges." The man stayed silent. Walker leaned forward. "You know how the desert works. You leave a man out there too long, he doesn't come back. You don't talk, and Reynolds dies. We'll make sure you're blamed for every last bit of it." Still silence, then finally a whisper. "He's near Dry Mesa, Northwest Cave. We had a backup stash buried there." Walker stood. That's all we needed. He turned to the officer. "Get a chopper ready. We're going in now." Back in the cave, Mark had worn his zip ties down to the final strand. He worked the edge of a sharp rock like a saw, one small stroke at a time. Sweat poured down his neck. His heart raced. The man paced the cave, loading supplies into a canvas bag, a pistol, canned food, a folded map. "We leave in an hour," he said. "Dark falls fast out here." Mark nodded. "Where are we going?" The man smirked. "A place nobody goes unless they want to disappear." Mark saw his moment. The man turned his back, checking his gear. Mark pushed his wrists hard. Snap, the ties broke. He didn't hesitate. He lunged for the pistol sitting near the bag. The man spun. "Hey!" Mark grabbed the gun and aimed it, hands trembling. "Don't move." The man raised his hands slowly. "Easy. You don't know how to use that." "I do now." "Pulling the trigger's the easy part," the man said. "Living with it, that's harder." Mark's hands tightened. "You made me live with a lot already." Then the sound of a helicopter. Blades chopping the hot air. The man's eyes widened. "No." Mark stepped back toward the cave entrance. Dust swirled as the chopper circled above. A megaphone crackled. "Mark Reynolds, this is the state police. If you can hear us, signal immediately." Mark stumbled outside, raising the gun over his head and waving it. A spotlight hit him. Behind him, the tattooed man cursed and ran. Gunfire. 2 quick shots. Officers in desert camo repelled from the chopper. One tackled the man. Another ran to Mark. "You're safe." "We got you." Mark collapsed. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. He was finally going home. But what they'd find next, not far from that cave, buried 6 inches under the sand, would change the case forever. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The desert was quiet again, but not for long. After Mark was lifted into the helicopter and checked by the medics, a second search team combed the surrounding area. The 2 men who had taken his family were now in custody. Both were being held under heavy surveillance in separate facilities, and neither had spoken much since their arrests. But something about the area still felt unfinished. Walker stood beside the search crew just outside the cave where Mark had been found. He wasn't satisfied. The cave was only one piece of the puzzle. These guys weren't amateurs. They had a plan, a routine, and probably more than one hideout. One of the officers called out, "We've got fresh tire tracks, leading west, then looping back." Walker walked over. "Let's follow it. See where it goes?" They piled into 2 trucks and followed the tracks for about a mile through the dunes until they reached a dry, sloping basin surrounded by scattered Joshua trees. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just more of the same endless dirt and rock. But one of the younger deputies pointed. "Right there, that mound, see it?" It was a subtle bump in the earth. A small, recently disturbed patch of sand, no more than 2 feet wide. Walker climbed down and started digging with a folding shovel. After just a few inches, the blade hit something solid. He cleared more sand. It was a backpack, old, sun-faded, caked in dirt. Walker unzipped it and carefully pulled out the contents. There wasn't much inside. A half-used lighter, 2 empty water bottles, a blood-stained rag, and a Nikon DSLR wrapped tightly in a plastic bag. He looked at the others. Get this back to the station. Now. Back at the ranger post, Alyssa sat in a clean change of clothes, her wound bandaged, her kids finally asleep on cots beside her. She was still trembling. Her thoughts refused to settle. Every second dragged on. Every noise made her look toward the door. Then it opened. Walker stepped inside. Alyssa stood up immediately. Where is he? Walker gave a tired smile. He's alive. They got him. Her hands flew to her mouth. She started crying before she could stop herself. He's on his way, Walker added. Might take a few hours, but he's coming. Alyssa collapsed into the chair, sobbing, every part of her finally letting go. That night, while Alyssa and the kids were taken to a safe motel under protective watch, the forensic team got to work on the Nikon camera. The memory card was intact. Inside the station's small tech lab, a young detective loaded the files. There were hundreds of photos, some random, some of the road trip, Mark, Alyssa, Jamie, Clara smiling beside landmarks, eating at diners, making silly faces. The happy images were heartbreaking now. But then, the tone changed. Around the day 4 mark, the images got darker. Pictures taken from outside the car window. Shots of empty roads, the kids sleeping in the back seat. Mark looking over his shoulder nervously. Then, shots clearly not taken by the Reynolds family. One image showed Alyssa unconscious in the front seat, blood at her hairline. Another showed Clara crying beside her brother in the cave. And another, even darker, showed a black SUV parked beside their vehicle at an angle, both men clearly in frame, one with a rifle slung across his chest. The photos stopped after that, until one final video file appeared, time-stamped, 2 days after the Reynolds family vanished. The video started with heavy breathing. The camera shook in someone's hands. They were outside, in the desert. The lens zoomed toward the distance, blurry at first, but it focused on a man dragging something across the dirt. A person, it was Mark. He looked beaten, barely conscious. One of the men, the tattooed one, pulled him by the arm toward a shallow hole in the sand. Another voice, off camera, laughed. He won't remember any of this. Let's bury him, move camp, and we're done. The person holding the camera nodded. Then, just before the video cut out, the lens shifted slightly and captured something unexpected. A silver badge. Someone in law enforcement clothing. The room went silent. Walker, watching the video alongside the officers, leaned forward. Freeze that, the tech paused it. Zoomed in. There, clear as day, pinned on the edge of the frame, was a desert patrol patch. A specific regional unit, one that belonged to a now-retired ranger. Walker cursed under his breath. I know that guy. The room stared at him. He stood up. His name's Reed Taylor. Left the job last year, quiet exit. Nobody asked why. One of the officers raised an eyebrow. You think he was working with them? Could explain how these guys kept slipping around check stations. Someone on the inside, someone who knew when patrols were light, knew the blind spots. Walker turned toward the others. Find him. Hours later, Mark finally arrived at the safe motel in a blacked-out SUV. 2 troopers helped him out slowly. He was weak but alert. His lip was cracked and his left eye was bruised, but he was standing. Alyssa rushed out the door and into his arms before the car even stopped moving. They held each other for a long time. No words, just relief. The kids clung to their dad's legs, crying into his jeans. Walker stood nearby, watching, then walked up. We found something, he said quietly to Mark. Your camera. Mark blinked. The Nikon? Walker nodded. It was buried. You took some key photos and one of the guys got sloppy. Mark looked confused. I don't remember taking pictures after the cave. You didn't. They did. Walker showed him a still from the video. Mark stared at it for a long time. That's Reed, Ranger Reed. He was the guy who checked us in when we first got into the park. Yeah, Walker said grimly. We think he was feeding information to the men who took you. Mark's fists clenched. Walker placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll get him. But deep in the desert, miles from any paved road, a new trail was forming. One someone had hoped would never be found. And inside one final stash box, buried deeper than the rest, was something far worse than a camera. The morning sun was already scorching by the time Walker and his team reached the old ranger outpost listed on Reed Taylor's last known address. It was barely a structure, just a rusted trailer parked deep off a service road shaded by a crooked mesquite tree. The windows were covered with cardboard, and the air smelled like oil, sweat, and old metal. Walker approached the front door with his sidearm drawn. His backup followed close behind. They weren't taking chances. "Reed," Walker called out. "It's over. Come out with your hands up." No answer. They fanned out around the trailer. Walker gave a signal, then kicked the door in. Inside, the place was a mess. Old maps, survival gear, ammo boxes, and printed ranger route logs were scattered across the floor. On one wall, a large corkboard was filled with photographs, dozens of them. Not just of the Reynolds family, but of others, families, couples, solo hikers, all taken in remote areas, all marked with red ink. Walker stared at the board, his gut twisting. "This wasn't just a one-time thing," he said quietly. One of the deputies found a black binder near the bed. "Boss," he said, "you're going to want to see this." Inside the binder were lists, coordinates, handwritten notes. Most were scratched out, but one caught Walker's eye, a line that read, "Mesa stash box for final drop." No red ink, not scratched out, still active. They reached the location by noon. A chopper dropped them about a quarter-mile from the coordinates to avoid being spotted. The team moved quietly across the sand, rifles at the ready. The desert stretched wide and flat, dotted with thorny bushes and rock clusters. Then they saw it, a rocky ledge shaped like a bowl, with a mound of dirt at its center. Walker moved ahead and knelt beside it. The dirt was loose. He started digging with gloved hands. After about a minute, his fingers hit metal. A steel box. He carefully pulled it up and placed it on the ground. The lock had already been snapped. He opened it. Everyone leaned in. Inside were stacks of photos, several used SIM cards, a broken satellite phone, and a folded manila envelope. Walker opened it slowly. Inside were 8 printed passport photos. None of them belonged to the Reynolds family. "These people," the officer beside him said. "They're not in our system." Walker shook his head. "No, but I've seen that woman before. She was on one of the missing persons boards last year. Hiker from Nevada, vanished without a trace." He turned the envelope over. A sticky note was taped to the back. It read, "Last payment due. Burn everything after." Walker's eyes narrowed. This was business, organized. He looked at the others. Reed wasn't just helping these guys. He was part of something bigger. Back at the station, Mark and Alyssa were sitting with 2 agents from the State Bureau. Clara and Jamie were watching cartoons in the next room, finally smiling again. But Mark couldn't rest. He had a bruise forming along his ribs, a black eye, and a deep tension in his chest that wouldn't go away. One of the agents slid a folder across the table. "We found a list. You were just one entry." Mark opened it. The top page had the Reynolds family's names, car model, route, and even photos of them taken before the road trip started. He felt sick. They planned it. The agent nodded. "They stalked your route from the beginning, waited for the perfect stretch of road. That's when they cut the tire." Alyssa leaned in. "So the flat wasn't random?" "No," the agent said. "They slashed it during your lunch stop. Security footage caught them pulling in 2 spots down." Mark looked down at his hands. "They knew everything. Where we'd be, when we'd be alone. Looks like they've done this before. We found similar setups. We're still working to trace the full operation, but there's a larger ring, possibly selling information, or worse, selling people." Alyssa's face went pale. "We're going to be sold." The agent didn't answer. She already knew the truth. Meanwhile, Reed Taylor still hadn't been found. Walker stood by the edge of the ledge where the last box had been dug up. A cold wind brushed over the desert floor as he scanned the horizon through binoculars. No movement. But he had a feeling this wasn't over. Just then his radio buzzed, dispatched to Walker. "We've got a call-in tip. A woman near Laredo reported seeing a man matching Reed's description boarding a cargo truck headed west." Walker grabbed the radio. "Copy that. Tell him to hold him if spotted. I'm moving now." He turned to the team. "We've got a lead." Hours later, in a rest stop near the Texas border, a state trooper approached a man standing beside a vending machine. "Sir," the man turned slowly, gray beard, dusty boots, desert tan jacket. Need you to come with us." The man's eyes flicked left and right, measuring. Then he bolted. The trooper shouted and gave chase. Other officers joined in. They cut him off near the parking lot. Reed raised a pistol. "Don't do it," an officer shouted. He fired once wide. They fired back. 2 shots hit him in the shoulder. He collapsed beside the curb. The nightmare was finally unraveling. That night, Walker visited the Reynolds family at the safe house. Mark opened the door, bruised but upright. Walker gave him a small, tired smile. "We got him." Mark didn't speak, just nodded. Walker stepped inside and looked around. The kids were drawing on the floor. Alyssa was heating something on the stove. They looked normal again, or at least like they were trying to be. Walker sat down across from Mark. "You said they took your camera on day 4, Walker said. "Do you remember what was on it?" Mark shook his head. "Just some road trip shots. The usual." Walker pulled something from his pocket, a printed photo from the memory card. A strange one. It showed the back of a truck in the desert, no people, just footprints around it. It wasn't from the Reynolds route. Different scenery, but it was time-stamped just 3 days after the family vanished. "Looks like they used your camera even after the fact," Walker said. "Almost like they were documenting something for someone else." Mark stared at the image. Why? Walker didn't know, but someone somewhere had been watching it all unfold. And they were still out there. The days that followed were both quiet and tense. Mark, Alyssa, and the kids were placed under federal protection. A temporary home had been arranged in a suburban neighborhood several hours from the desert, neutral ground, calm streets, no media attention. But neither Mark nor Alyssa slept well. At night, every little sound set off alarms in their minds. A car door closing, footsteps outside, even the hum of the fridge. They kept a baseball bat near the bed. Alyssa double-checked every lock before sleeping. Mark, though trying to relax for his kids, constantly watched through the blinds. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the trees, Walker showed up at their front door again, this time dressed in plain clothes, not his ranger uniform. He looked tired. His face was unshaven, and there were deep creases around his eyes. Alyssa opened the door. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head. "No, but I need to talk to Mark." Mark joined them in the living room while Clara and Jamie played a game in the next room. Walker leaned forward. "We traced one of the SIM cards from the camera to a burner phone used at a gas station in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. 1 hour after your family went missing, that same phone pinned a location, 50 miles south of the abduction point." "Where they moved us first," Mark said slowly. Walker nodded. "We checked the camera again. One of the photos has GPS data. It was turned back on by accident, just long enough to embed coordinates." He passed Mark a printed satellite image. It showed a clearing near a dry riverbed. Nothing but rocks and sand. "This was taken 1 day after you disappeared," Walker said. "Someone buried that camera, walked back out, and got picked up." Mark stared at the photo. "Picked up by who?" "We don't know yet," Walker admitted. "But here's the strange part. The pickup wasn't made by either of the 2 men we arrested. It was a third person. We saw his face, but no ID hits. Like he doesn't exist in any system." Alyssa furrowed her brow. "Wait, you're saying someone else was helping them? Someone who hasn't been caught?" "Yes," Walker said, and he was careful. He never showed his face to cameras except once. At a rest stop in Nevada, long before the abduction. He laid out another photo, grainy, pulled from a gas station feed. It showed a man leaning on a payphone, wearing a ball cap low over his face. But the photo wasn't of him. It was what was on the phone booth wall that caught Mark's eye. A printed flyer, "Missing Jennifer Sloan. Last seen June 2020, Route 14." Mark felt something tighten in his chest. "That's another one, isn't it?" Walker nodded. "We think they've done this before. Many times, all over the Southwest. Your case just got attention because you lived." A long silence passed. "Are you saying this goes deeper?" Alyssa asked. "That this wasn't just 2 criminals in the desert?" Walker leaned back. "I think they're part of something organized. It might not be massive, but it's quiet, smart, and mobile. They pick isolated roads, families, people with no reason to be missed for a few days." Mark said, "And what? They film them." "Why?" Walker hesitated. "That's what we're still piecing together." He pulled out one last item, a small plastic bag with a SIM card inside. This one was just decrypted. It belonged to the third man. He took a few photos, one of your van's license plate, another of your son sleeping in the back seat. Mark's voice lowered. How long were they watching us? Walker's face was grim. At least 2 days before they made their move. Meanwhile, down in El Paso, agents from Homeland Security tracked a truck registered to an old shell company linked to Reed Taylor's name. It had been parked behind a burned-out auto shop, covered by a dirty tarp. Inside the truck was a hidden compartment under the floorboards. Inside the compartment, maps, a CB radio, and receipts, all paid in cash for fuel, tools, and equipment. One receipt was from a roadside diner just 3 hours after the Reynolds family disappeared. That confirmed it. They were moving fast, organized. One name kept showing up across these receipts. E. Loring, no known background, no fingerprints, no driver's license. The man without a history. Back in their temporary home, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even with 2 patrol cars stationed on the corner and Walker checking in regularly, he didn't feel safe. One night, he opened his laptop and went through the photos the agents had shared with him. Some were hard to look at, especially the ones taken without their knowledge, but he stopped on one photo in particular. It was taken inside a gas station convenience store. Mark was in it, blurry in the background, reaching for a soda, but in the foreground, behind the stack of chip bags, a man was holding a phone. Looking straight at him, Mark hadn't noticed him at the time, and it wasn't either of the 2 men who abducted them. It was someone else, the third man, E. Loring. Mark zoomed in. The man's face was partially shadowed, but something about it felt familiar. Not the features, the expression. Cold, calculating. Suddenly something clicked. Mark stood up and pulled a road map from his backpack. He spread it on the kitchen table, tracing the route they'd taken 2 years ago. They'd made a detour near the Arizona border because of a road closure. Alyssa had taken a photo of the detour sign. He found it on his phone. The bottom corner of the sign had a small sticker, barely visible, but it matched a logo found on one of the receipts. A company called Sunrock Supply. Alyssa joined him. "What are you doing?" He pointed. "This logo, it's a front." It was on the gas station, the road sign, and even the tarp over the truck. They're using it to move gear across state lines. Alyssa's eyes widened. "They're still out there, aren't they?" Mark nodded. "And they're watching the families that survived. Not to silence us, but maybe to find out what we know." The next day, Walker returned with new information. A fresh SIM card was recovered during a warehouse bust in Nevada, and inside it, a video file, time-stamped exactly 11 months after the Reynolds incident. Walker hadn't opened it yet. He slid the drive across the table. "Whatever's on this, it might explain everything." Mark took a deep breath. He clicked play, and what they saw next would finally connect every piece. The video opened in silence. The shaky footage showed a stretch of empty desert, flat and dry, a crooked sun casting long shadows across the sand. The person holding the camera was walking, breathing hard. No voice, no talking, just boots crunching on gravel and the soft whistle of wind. Walker, Mark, and Alyssa sat huddled around the laptop in their living room. The agents had stepped back, giving them space. No one made a sound. The camera panned toward a black SUV parked alone on a rocky slope. Then movement. A man dragged a folding table from the back of the SUV. He set it up near the edge of a shallow trench already dug into the earth. Then the third man stepped into view, the one Mark had spotted in the gas station photo. Cold face, sharp jaw, ball cap pulled low. He looked directly into the camera. "Record everything," he said calmly. The man behind the lens nodded but said nothing. They pulled a heavy bag from the truck and unzipped it on the table. Inside were several items: a child's shoe, a blood-stained t-shirt, a cell phone with a cracked screen, a driver's license. Mark's face tensed. Alyssa reached for his hand. Her fingers were ice cold. In the video, the man spoke again. "Package confirmed, no witnesses. Offload as instructed." Then he glanced off camera. "Wipe the rest." The person behind the camera walked forward, zooming in on a set of large plastic storage bins in the back of the SUV. One of them was open. Inside were rows of labeled folders, not names, but numbers. Dozens of them, possibly hundreds. Walker leaned in. "Pause," he said. The agent stopped the video. Walker pointed at the labels. "Those are case IDs, internal codes. It's not police, private, military style." Mark whispered. "Who were they selling this to?" Walker didn't answer. They pressed play again. The man opened one folder. Inside were photographs, not just of the Reynolds family, but other families, hikers, couples, truckers. Each set came with a typed summary: age, occupation, travel route, habits, vulnerabilities. It was a catalog, a list of targets, a system. Then the camera panned to a white cooler resting in the shade. The man lifted the lid. Inside was a camera, Mark's camera, sealed in a plastic bag with red tape. "I'm done with this one," he said. "You know what to do." The man behind the lens nodded. He walked a few feet away, dug a shallow hole, and buried the camera. The video stopped there. Silence hung in the room like a thick cloud. Mark finally broke it. "They didn't just want to hurt us. We were part of something bigger. A test run, maybe. A product." Walker stood up and walked to the window. His jaw was tight. "They were selling the data," he said slowly. "Maybe not people, but information. Travel patterns, weak spots, victim profiles. The kind of stuff that can be used for anything: organized crime, trafficking, even assassination." "Like a market," Alyssa said softly. Walker nodded. "Exactly." The next week, federal agents raided a facility in Arizona, an off-the-grid warehouse registered under a false business name, Sunrock Supply and Transport. Inside, they found over 50 hard drives and several encrypted laptops. No people, just files. The drives held thousands of folders, each containing photos, videos, GPS logs, and handwritten notes, all tracking civilians on road trips across the country. The ring wasn't supernatural. It wasn't mystical. It was worse. It was real, professionally organized. Clean, quiet, invisible. Some of the victims were never found. Others, like the Reynolds family, had managed to escape, but only because something had gone wrong that day in the desert. And buried in the middle of it all, under miles of silence, was that one camera. The camera that didn't get destroyed like the others. The camera that accidentally got left behind. The camera that showed the truth. 6 months later, the Reynolds family was relocated for good, a new town, new identities. The kids were enrolled in school under different names. Mark and Alyssa were given new jobs, not what they used to do, but enough to start over. They kept it quiet. The world never heard their full story. It was buried in sealed court records, classified investigations, and unnamed task forces. But Mark never forgot. One day he took the Nikon camera, now cracked, dusty, and long deactivated, and locked it in a storage unit under a false name. A reminder, not just of what they survived, but of what still might be out there. Watching, waiting, learning from the last time, and planning for the next. If you liked this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also another, to strengthen our community. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.